Hello everyone and welcome back to Wargame Red Dragon. I have something a little bit different for you guys today. This is not a replay, clearly this is a deck, and it's a little bit of an odd one. This is Commonwealth Motorized, and this is a deck that, well, a variant of it, Commonwealth Moto, you guys would have seen me play a couple weeks back when I had a Moto versus Moto video, and then recently when I had Haymaker, also known as Stribble, on the channel to talk about a 3v3 game, and I figured, you know what? Let's dive into it, let's look at this off-meta deck, and Haymaker is here with me to talk about it, how he likes to use it, what's good, what's bad, what's amazing, what's downright awful, and what you need to do and what you need to avoid. So Haymaker, you want to say hello?
Hey, how's it going? I'm Haymaker, and I like playing Commonwealth Moto.
So, why? I mean, okay, no, hold on, I feel like I'm doing a disservice here. I want to establish, there's meta and there's not meta, and sometimes the line between these, the gulf between them is very large, and sometimes it's very small. And so my question to you is not just why, it's what about this Moto deck, which is not what people think of when they think Commonwealth, motivates you to play it and allows you to have a fun time and some victories?
So, your opener, I believe, is one of the stronger Blue 4 Moto openers that you can have.
I mean, the clear standout there is the Rover Wombat, right?
Yes, of course. It's the Rover Wombat paired with the Vickers Mark 11 with fairly decent recon. Second, you have a very solid take and hold strategy. So there are a couple of different Moto strategies. One of the two is you take a position and then you flood it with units to hold that position, right? Between your Highlanders and SAS, that is very, very easy to do. Yes, the Highlanders aren't perfect, but they do the job very well in a Moto context.
Okay, so this isn't a deck that So you want to end the game in 10 minutes, not by attacking everywhere all the time necessarily, but by taking so much ground and then becoming a brick wall kind of thing.
That is, I would say, yes. Just although you will continue to attack everywhere, it's not that the alternative strategies aren't available to also play. It's more that this is just more able to be done.
Okay, and you've played this deck up to Colonel, I believe?
Yes.
Okay, that's respectable. That's, it must not be, that bad, or you are just absurdly skilled, or some combination of the two. So let's go tab by tab, let's talk about what's good, what's bad, and I think the logistics is pretty self-explanatory. Moto doesn't really want to be taking a fob, so let's go ahead and jump right into infantry. And, well, can you tell us the general layout before I ask questions?
So, I have my pure combat infantry that I want to fight other infantry with my Commander's 90 in the first couple bits. And I have my Gurkhas 90, which are my my forest fighter, grinder, anti-vehicle infantry. I usually just turn off the enemy and push the Law 80s up forward. Then Highlanders 90 are a role-specific infantry, which I will deploy in very specific positions where I just want that long-range Erics. The Highlanders 90 is just there for the Erics and the 10 health. The enemy and the C7 are just a bonus.
Fair enough.
Then I have Chaff. Cheap Chaff, that's good enough, right? And comes with a 50 cal transport. That's what the can rifles are for. When I just need picket units that either soak up damage or can be a tripwire. Then we got SAS, which are, no explanation, they are just fantastic. Man pads, anti-tank, special forces,
Moto veterancy.
Moto veterancy. Some people take them in the H7, but I think that in this particular deck, because I only have one card of them, having them come in the ground transport option is more consistently safe.
And I do see here that you have only 1 out of 3 of the Lynx H7s remaining, so I imagine we'll see that in a later on tab.
Yes. And then finally, we got the Mislans.
Now, what do you find that you run out of first?
Probably either Gurkhas or Highlanders.
Really?
So I tend to be very aggressive with the Highlanders in positioning early on because I'm going to take a position and then I like to just flood it with high threat units, and the Highlanders are one of those. They're for their price, they're a very high threat unit because because armor and vehicles are usually significantly more points than infantry, and therefore if someone makes a mistake, the Highlanders
Capitalize.
can capitalize and get a large return.
Okay, so that makes sense. I think when I tried to play this, by the way, I dramatically underused the Highlanders, but I've seen you use them. I've experienced you using those, and yeah, when you don't expect 25 AP to the face, it's pretty brutal.
I would also say, though, that units I tend to run out on depends more on the map of whether or not it's a infantry grind or if it's a field fight.
So there's a difference between something like mud fight and hell in a very small place, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else you want to say about the infantry tab, or should we keep moving on?
I'd say there are some variants. The Fuzi 90s or Fuzis are reasonable replacements for can rifles, and more importantly, in better players might not even run the can rifles and might run more shocks.
Gotcha. And then I do have to ask you, if you're buying these guys for the Erics, why not take the Erics?
The extra health plus the tinge of better anti-infantry combat capability.
I mean, I guess for 5 points, what you're looking at, the 5 different strength, the tertiary, it's really not a bad package when you think about it.
Yeah.
The difference, of course, being that the Erics can't shoot at infantry for these guys, but I've always found that the Eric squads aren't the best at killing infantry anyway, compared to the cheaper 10-point fire support teams. But I don't know.
It's because of the travel time, in my opinion, right? The Maws are gonna fire instantly and do loads of suppression damage very quickly, whereas the Eric's is a guided missile. It takes time.
I suppose if you take the Fusiliers 90, you could just make this 22 armor piercing the deck, which would be, well,
basically.
I guess not like Commando's 90, but like, I know Claver runs a lot of 22 AP in Commonwealth, so I imagine with Moto it's even better. Any reason to avoid the Paratroopers? Paratroopers 90?
Comparatively, so in the deck, they would serve, because of their pricing, they would either be replacing Gurkhas or Commandos. And in both of those capacities, the Commandos are either more efficient anti-infantry and come in better transports, or in regards to the Gurkha are going to be more health, more rockets.
It's an awkward
for
spot.
5 points, you're getting for 5 points, you're getting double the ammo and a third of the health.
Yeah, I suppose that does kind of leave Paratroopers 90 in an awkward spot here. And last question, then we will move on. Why no flame infantry?
So, with Moto decks, your veterancy is high enough with the Commandos 90, and the Commandos 90 being specifically unique with their primary weapon, that against Special Forces squads, you really don't need a flamethrower unit to deal panic damage.
Okay, so your engagement might not always be perfect, but you can handle it well enough, kind of thing.
Yes. Additionally, you also get special forces that are very good at combat in the recon tab as well.
I'll be happy to see them, because right now the biggest thing that sticks out to me is if I run into Eurocorps Moto and I'm fielding this, I'm gonna have to figure out a way to deal with all the Fallschirm and Commando Marine. So I definitely want to see that in the recon tab later on. And then support. This is chunky. That's 4 tracked units in a Moto deck support tab. So what's going on here?
So the thing is, all of these units are very good, and upvetting them all, with the exception, of course, of the mortar, is really important for the speed and performance of the deck. Let's start, since you noticed the tracked units, we'll talk about the one untracked unit here first. All you really need untracked for in this capacity, because of the role that these AA units provide, is for the opener. Your Wolverines and your SAS are fast enough. Basically, you use your Wolverines primarily in your openers to protect your opening pushes. They're cheap. I typically buy them in double stacks, and because they're so inexpensive, they'll upvet very, very quickly.
Okay.
Then, as the game progresses, if I need fast reinforcement AA, I can either buy the Wolverine or the SAS, and both of them will serve decently well, depending on the situation. But I need often in a take and hold strategy, some units that are a little bit more substantial and a little bit more universal. The Stormers and the ADATs are those sorts of units.
Gotcha. And I guess, so before I ask about these two, because I definitely will, the other thing that I'm just doing some quick math here, and, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 5 different versions of ground-based anti-air here. Do you really tend to buy too many ASFs, or is this sort of what you lean on for your air defense?
So I actually do buy 2 ASFs because most of these are anti-helo, and second, because the ADATs is almost effectively not an AA piece. You are buying it for its multi-role capability, but the ADATs ultimately is there to deal with very high value threats. And
Gotcha.
I don't really. Sometimes it's because it's a really high value target in and of itself. Sometimes it's better to leave it off, and therefore having other alternative AA around is useful. The Stormers and the tracked Rapiers are able then to function when your ADATS is focusing on dealing with tanks or transports.
Like the sidearm Murph my Super Heavy a couple weeks back.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Well,
Now
that
the
does make a lot
ADATS
of
will.
sense.
Now the ADATS is still an AA piece, and I still view it as such when buying for an opener. But in the context of the deck, I see the ADATS more as a para or a fizz equivalent with extra versatility.
Gotcha. I do also just want to point out that shovel is not listed as a secondary weapon, and this disappoints me greatly. Okay, so then I guess I understand. I won't even ask about this because the tracked rapier FSA is just amazing for the points cost, and so bringing it as an anti-plane tool, especially when, as you pointed out, like, this is anti-helo, 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 anti-helo. So I guess I understand where you're coming from for that. That makes a lot of sense. You got a mortar, and then I have seen people run the M108, but I've never really been a fan. And that's really, I mean, that and the Abbott are your only artillery options. So I'm with you. This makes sense. This tab makes sense. So let's move on to tanks, and there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, one choice, but lots to talk about because obviously many other people run slightly different.
So the C2 Maxis, I think when I made this Commonwealth Moto deck without looking at yours first, I actually took 2 tanks, and I took, I believe, the AS1 Plus and the C2. Mm-hmm. Why only go with the C2?
Well, because I don't have the points elsewhere. This primarily stems in one of the big differences between your and my decks, which is taking the tracked rapiers, and B, I feel comfortable using the Vickers Mark 11 in the vehicle tab in most situations. And as the Leopard AS1 Plus it's not identical to the Vickers, but they serve very similar price point roles.
Okay.
With the exception of the Leopard AS1 Plus is a little bit more specialized.
Gotcha. So, I mean, just to look at that, 16 versus 17 AP, 10 rate of fire versus 8. But I suppose in the opener, the wheels matter more than the 2 RPM. So I get where you're coming from for that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Like, if I had the extra 2 points, I would fit the AS1 Plus in. Because it gives me more versatility. It's a very good unit. It means for maps like Hell in a Very Small Place, I can have that extra bit of armor and that extra bit of fire rate. But not having the 2 points, I can use the Vickers Mark 11 in a lot of the same situations. And when I need more armor, I just get the Maxis.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, part of the game is deck building. Part of deck building is making hard choices. So yeah. That does make sense as well. And then A full recon tab, you'll find this in most Moto decks, and just the couple of things that don't even really need to be mentioned that much. The Gazelle AH1, probably a pretty routine choice if you want the exceptional optics. The Scimitar, or I think Bikefish is still in the chat, so let's just go ahead and call this by its proper name, the Skimiter. We have the Oslov 25, the Ferret. Ferret's a little weird.
Yeah.
And then double Pathfinders and SBS. So a lot going on here. Where do you want to start?
So we'll start with where you started. With the Gazelle. I personally am a sucker for exceptional optics helicopters. I find that extra bit of range, that extra bit of penetration value that you get like into tree lines and IDing targets is always useful, especially when you're in a Moto opener where you need that, like, to be able to ID targets quickly and.
Yeah, you've definitely taken me by surprise with how far you can see with these things before, and I think the thing to point out too is that it always depends on the context of your deck options, and the Commonwealth doesn't really have the same, it doesn't have a 35-point Alouette,
No.
as an example. So it's not really being compared against that, it's being compared against still paying 50 points, and then getting worse optics, or getting a weaker helicopter, or both, in terms of, 4 strength, 6 strength, and then I don't think many people take the Gazelle snub, but I have seen it, and it is hilarious when it works. So I guess that makes sense. And then for vehicle options, there's a lot here. Actually, far more than you might first think. And I know what we're all thinking is why not take the Parenti, but
Yes, of course.
my question is actually, there are a couple units in here that look really similar at first glance. One of them is the Scimitar, and for example, something like the Scorpion, where you're trading off between the autocannon and the heat gun, and then secondarily the Oslov 25 and the Fox. And then I do have to also ask, why pay 45 points for 45% accuracy ATGMs?
So we'll start with the Scimitars and we'll start with the autocannons. So Scimitar, compared to the Scorpion, you're getting it for cheaper, and the autocannon can target helicopter targets. That's most of my logic there. Obviously, I'm pretty sure that your HE output is actually realistically a little bit higher, because I think you roll more times, but don't quote me on that. But the big thing is this can target all sorts of target types. So I can leave the Scimitar as a double stack or a singleton on flanks as base defense.
And if someone's trying to be sneaky, you might just shoot them down.
Exactly. The Scimitar there is a more omni-purpose base defense / picket unit.
Gotcha. Now for the Oslov and the Fox.
Yes. So the Oslov, this took me a while to figure out. I was conflicted on whether or not the Oslov is redundant with the Scimitar, but ultimately, you need some sort of wheeled autocannon in this deck, because this deck lacks autocannons, and is one of the big weaknesses of it. The Fox compared to the Aslav, both autocannons are considered meh. The Bushmaster is significantly better than the Rarden, and getting the extra autonomy plus the extra M240 is worth the price.
Gotcha. So basically, my understanding of this is the Oslov 25 brings a lot to the table for 25 points, and losing the size isn't really too bad of a thing for something that's intended to be fire support, so it's not going to be hidden all the time anyway.
Yeah, the Aslavs are mostly purchased in the opener or for flanks. Gotcha.
Now, moving on to the Ferret. Most people, I think, would look at this, particularly in unspec, where you don't have that additional veterancy from a Moto deck, and say this is not really worthwhile for 45% accuracy. Does this thing hit often, or is that even really the goal?
So, the primary value here, and what I'm looking for here, is a very good optics ground vehicle with some combat capability. Second is stealth on an ATGM carrier. So the two big problems with ATGM vehicles, in my opinion, in this game are always range, or stealth. There are plenty of ATGM vehicles that are 2600 or 2625 or below that, which I will just not take simply because they aren't stealthed or don't hit hard enough. So the TOW2s are a rare exception because they just hit so hard. But even then, it's a bit of a coin toss whether or not it's necessary for the deck. In the case of the Ferret, it is able to fire from stealth and be able to get shots off safely. In that capacity, paired with the Moto veterancy, you have the missile's accurate enough that it means that the Ferret's not that likely to die after dumping missiles, because people are far more hesitant to approach a blank tree line that's firing missiles than they are an identified vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point.
Additionally, pairing it with the ADATs and openers is quite nice.
Yeah,
because you get the double missile hit.
Yeah, that one
And that
definitely has never cost me a super heavy before. I don't know why you'd even say that. So, okay, I covered the vehicles pretty well, and I think the SBS are pretty self-explanatory as a choice, especially in Link's Age 7. So the next thing I want to look at is actually the Pathfinders, because these guys are a sleeper unit, I think, if you don't play Commonwealth all that much, which I don't. And the first time I saw them, I was sitting there looking at you like, okay, well, I have never heard of the C2A1 before. The M72 Law has 13 AP power. Why do you love these guys so much? So, why do you love these guys so much?
Well, in my opinion, as a rule of thumb, the most important stat on an infantry unit is its training level. The difference in combat capability between Shock and Rookie, or Elites and Shock, is enormous. Now, those differences can be overcome with other assets, but in a just pure infantry fighting capability standpoint, training is an enormous amount of the equation. Add on top of this the fact that Pathfinders are the price of a a higher tier shock unit, and add on to the fact that they get a carbine as their primary rifle. They're a very, very cost efficient recon elite squad.
Yeah, I mean,
and the law isn't that bad.
Okay, the law is kind of bad.
I mean, it's 20 for the lower tier launchers. 20 rounds a minute, 10 rockets is good enough.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, we can pull up some Yebagun and look at their launcher as well if we want to really
debate the nuance. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the most difficulty I've ever had playing with you against your Pathfinders is when all of a sudden there were 3 of them in a town block and I just got melted by 25-point elites. So I definitely see where you're coming from with that. Onto the vehicle tab, I think Rover Wombat, why not take 2 is self-explanatory. We already covered the Vickers. So in the interest of time, let's go ahead and look at helicopters and then air. So,
okay.
Do you like the Lynx 3?
That's a tough question. Do I like the Lynx 3 in any other deck? No. Do I like the Lynx 3 in Commonwealth Moto? Yes. It's absolutely necessary in this deck.
Because I have a hard time believing that a helicopter most people consider outright bad and would usually suggest even taking the TOW2 over is necessary. What about this makes it necessary?
So one, having access to the Hellfires, getting that extra range means in emergency situations with the speed of the deck, you can have your Lynx 3 swing in and take care of high threat targets without interrupting, without having to wait as much as you would for other helicopter options. Yes, the TOW2 is cheaper, but the Lynx 3 as a whole package is going to give you the Stinger and the Hellfires, which means you're getting extra AA and extra anti-tank all in one package, and tanks and helicopters are usually the go-to response buys to Moto pushes, in my opinion.
Fair enough. I mean, people do want something that'll outclass anything you have on the ground. If you can kill it, that makes sense. And then last question, why the Lynx AH7 instead of something like the Bushranger?
The 20mm is a lot of DPS at a good range. Plus, it can target helicopters. So because it's twin autocannons, you're getting double, I think you're getting double burst count, and therefore the suppression and damage output for 30% accuracy at a reasonable range is actually quite high. They're very decent as base defense as well, because they are hovering and can target helicopters as well. And finally, because you don't have that 30-point scout helicopter, throwing these out there, yes, their optics are poor, but throwing these out there in an opener to spot other helicopters or just to check for
traps
and whatnot, check for traps, is not the worst option depending on what map you're on.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I mean, throwing out something worth 30 points out ahead of something worth 65 does seem like it makes a lot of sense, especially when, you know, the next step up is 100. So let's talk about the air tab. It looks like you have 2 ASFs here, a bomber, Seed, and the Kahu, which is, I believe, the highest price and, in theory, performance ATGM plane that Commonwealth has. The Eurofighter, of course, is a premier ASF. The F2 is something I'll kind of poke at you a little bit with, and then the F111C is a classic. So what do I want to ask first? Why the F2?
So primarily it's cheaper than the F3. The F3 and the F2 are both good options. They both have different advantages, but the big advantage that the F2 has is you can buy it faster.
And does that 20-point difference really make that much of a change?
That's a full, like, you get like 7 points per, or you get...
Yeah, so 7 points per tick,
seconds.
so that's 4 ticks worth of income effectively. Well, no, geez. 3, yeah, I can do math. 3 ticks worth of income.
So, at least in my opinion, that extra couple of ticks matters if there's another plane on the board. And second, you're getting them at elite, which means they're going to, when in range, perform better than the F3s at killing targets. Not surviving,
Gotcha.
but at killing.
So the F3 might get the rocket off, missile off first, but the F2, assuming that, like, if you turn into each other and the difference in time is very minimal, the F2 will actually get kills more consistently, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the F3 is a fantastic pick if you are worried about enemy aircraft escaping, or if you're on a really large map.
Gotcha.
The F3 also is more survivable with ECM. I think both are reasonable choices, but I have been having more success with the F2.
Gotcha. Moving past this, I think the Eurofighter is pretty self-explanatory, and the Voodoo is the common pick. But I will ask you, have you ever tried the Sea Harrier?
I have tried the Sea Harrier, but I'm most familiar with the Voodoo because I've played a good bit of NORAD in the past.
Gotcha, and it seems like in terms of keeping the cost down with things like the F2, the Voodoo's 90-point price tag does make a lot of sense here for why you'd sort of go to it by default.
Keeping the price down as much as you can to help help offset the Moto tax is really nice.
Alright, well I'm going to pull a Yu-Gi-Oh here and say you've now fallen for my trap card. Because I'm going to ask you, why take the Kahu instead of the Jaguar GR1A?
Oh, well, I've run the Jaguar GR1A in the past. It's a very good option. The problem is that ultimately it is a very frustrating option due to the fact that you don't get fire and forget missiles, and it's the flight performance of the Jaguar plane platform is awful.
How do you mean?
So, notice the turn radius differences between these two aircraft. The Jaguar GR1A, in order to micro, is significantly more finicky and strange than the Kahu. The GR1A takes a lot more pre-planning and goofy paths. It takes more pre-planning, and it takes more inattentiveness by your opponent to get successful runs on high-value targets. Whereas the Kahu, while is slower, can turn on a dime and dump 2 fairly accurate fire and forget missiles.
Gotcha. So then the other competitor here, I think, for this slot that it would seem to me is the Harrier GR7, which of course is more impactful against soft targets than the Kahu that can't even shoot them. Is there a reason to go with the Kahu instead of the GR7?
So I like the GR7, especially back before the guided missile or guided bomb nerf. The GR7 would have been my absolute pick, and I think would have just been the right call because of its versatility. However, I tend to like to have something more dedicated in this capacity since I have the F-111Cs. I find that the 4 10 HE Paveway 2s often are just not enough for higher armored targets.
Fair enough. And with that, I think we'll leave the F-111C as self-explanatory. We've heard an overview of how to play the deck at the beginning of this, so we'll leave that there as well. And Haymaker, thank you for coming on, for sharing an off-meta deck that you've had some success with as a Colonel, playing Wargame Red Dragon in ranked mode. And do you have any closing thoughts?
I'd say probably that one of the most important things about this deck is getting the right ratio of opening vehicles to opening infantry.
Gotcha.
Often not having enough Vickers or Wombats can cause this push to stall out.
Fair enough. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for coming on, and thank you everyone for hanging around. We'll see you again real soon.